Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thanks you for making a little bit of time to join us for this webinar, which we're calling How Privacy Programs Can Be Strengthened by InfoSec and AI Frameworks. My name is Dave Cohen. I'm a director at Mina Partners. And I'm joined by my good friend and long-term colleague, Heidi Salo, who is a partner with Potomac Law Group. Heidi, welcome. And thanks for joining us today. And before we get started with the program itself, do you want to tell us just a little bit about your practice and your areas of specialty?
Sure. So I joined Potomac Law almost 2 years ago in February of 23. And I do, all kinds of things related to privacy and information security and now AI. I've been a privacy lawyer for many years and have also focused on cybersecurity for many years. So what I love about Potomac Law Group is that I'm able to work with companies and organizations actually of all different sizes, from startups to, Fortune 100 companies, nonprofits, et cetera, and, help them implement data governance, privacy, and cybersecurity programs.
Terrific. Thanks, Heidi. And the reason Heidi and I decided to join forces on this program is Mina Partners works often with both internal counsel and external counsel, and to help implement the legal privacy requirements and now InfoSec and AI governance requirements as well. So you'll hear us refer throughout the program to data governance as a general term covering the expanding legal compliance requirements that organizations are facing. And at Mina, we end up working with our clients to help figure out how to basically make these put these requirements into play, how to make them work. And you'll hear about that. So Heidi will be picking up the kind of legal perspective, and I'll be picking up the operational perspective. So with that, let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. And before we get started with our program here, we want to just provide a quick disclaimer that the views expressed here are Heidi's and my own and don't necessarily represent the views of the organizations that we work for, and are not to be considered legal advice. So please know that. And if we move forward to the next slide, please. The agenda for our program today, we're going to talk initially about the importance of the relationship between the privacy and information security teams, specifically within organizations. And then we're going to get into really kind of the heart and the core of the program, which is sharing with you some of the existing standards and frameworks that are out there that you can leverage at your organization. And depending on what sector you're in, the size of your organization, et cetera, some frameworks or standards might be better suited to you than others. And we'll talk about that a little bit. And by the way, I forgot to mention earlier that we hope this can be an interactive program for those of you that are listening to us live right now. So we welcome your questions. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we will address them as we can as we go throughout the program. And then after we talk about those frameworks and how you might apply them in your own organizations, we will then finish with some key actionable steps, some kind of practical takeaways that both Heidi and I have seen over the years that we've been working in the industry that hopefully will provide some value for you. So with that, we can move on to the next slide. The importance of the privacy InfoSec partnership here. This is a quote that many of you that have been around in the space for a while have probably heard, and that is, you can have information security without privacy, but you can't have privacy without information security. So those of you that are here today listening from the perspective of privacy compliance know that it's absolutely critical for you to have a good working relationship, good trusting working relationship with your IT security professionals and your IT security department within your organization. And that's because personal information is stored within these systems, to state the obvious. Personal information governance is heavily reliant on the IT systems and security. So those permissions, controls, lockdowns, firewalls, etc., are all the techniques that we use to protect personal information. And they're the mechanics of what personal information protection are built upon. So access and permissions really form a lot of times people say, what's the difference between information privacy and information security? I like to think about it as information security traditionally was a little bit more binary. A piece of information is either locked or it's available. Tends to be a little bit more binary that way. However, privacy requires access and permissions, so it's more of a information that is locked down at times for certain people and open at times for certain people. So really, that's where the privacy team ends up needing to program those in and working with the IT security team to be able to provide that access. And so organizational privacy awareness, kind of what we're talking about here is the front lines, requires ongoing education, which can accompany IT security training. So privacy awareness training, what is personal information, what is sensitive information, is really needs to be constantly put out there for the folks that are collecting, processing, dealing with personal information throughout the organization. And it's not a static process, it's a dynamic process. I'm sure that all of you listening and have hopefully a robust IT security awareness training within your organization. It's very common for privacy training to be layered over that to make the workforce aware of what they need to be protecting. Now, we haven't mentioned AI yet, and of course, that's one of the themes of our program here today. We're setting the stage here and providing an overview of kind of the evolution. Really, first there was there was information security, then privacy kind of came along, and now that we're in this new era of artificial intelligence technologies being utilized more and more within organizations. And so this provides the foundation for good data governance, which oftentimes now today is involving AI governance. And a lot of that AI governance, those tasks and responsibilities are very commonly being put upon folks in the privacy program, which is what we're talking about here today. So moving on to the next slide. These are some of the frameworks and standards that we're going to make you aware of today. We're not going to dive in deep into the details of all of these frameworks. That would take a much longer program, but we do want to raise them up for you, make you aware of their existence, and talk about them in general terms. And as you can see on this slide, we're going to focus on the NIST frameworks, and that's because they've been around for a while. They're very well known. Again, within the information security space. And then increasingly, the privacy framework was then developed and the AI risk management framework. So we're going to talk about what these frameworks involve. And the nice thing about them is that they share a lot of commonalities. We'll also then move on and talk about a few other frameworks and standards and regulations that you should be aware of that are also commonly put into play. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. The NIST privacy framework. One of the, here at Mina Partners, we have very commonly worked with our clients that have either asked us for or we've recommended the NIST privacy framework. And one of the most important reasons to recommend the NIST privacy framework and why you might want to consider it in your organization is that your IT professionals within your organization are probably familiar with the NIST IT security frameworks, and it's structured in a very similar way. So if you look down at that structure, that middle section there, identify, govern, control, communicate, and protect. These are going to be terms familiar to your IT security professionals, and the privacy framework kind of was modeled after or mirrors in a lot of ways the IT security framework. So what's the purpose of this framework? It's to help organizations manage privacy risks and protect individuals' privacy while fostering innovation. That is, it's meant to be industry friendly, business friendly, while still managing legal compliance risks and also maintaining trust between organizations and the customers, consumers, and employees that have made their personal information available to them. So moving down to the key points here on the bottom, some things that are important here. This is a voluntary tool for improving privacy through enterprise risk management. So this is a voluntary standard that can be adopted by organizations. It's not mandated by law that the NIST privacy framework be utilized or any of the NIST frameworks be utilized. It was developed for the government originally and then made its way into the private sector. And it supports ethical decision-making in compliance with privacy regulations. So it's a flexible and resilient framework that can be modified to suit these particular privacy laws that your organization is subject to, depending on jurisdiction, volume of personal information and accounts that are being collected and utilized, etc. And then lastly, as a key point here, it's flexible to address diverse privacy needs and technological trends. It's not meant to be a technologically prescriptive framework. It's meant to be a guideline. When you're using it as a framework, you're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at your own company's individual systems, processes, collection techniques, collection points, ways you process information, deletion requirements, outsourcing of personal information to subcontractors, third parties, vendors, etc. All those details are going to need to be investigated, and that's where the real lift comes here, honestly. But the NIST framework will provide a structure to help you organize that particular work. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about information security frameworks. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to talk a little bit about some of the details of the information security frameworks.
Thank you, Dave. So as Dave touched on, there are many information security frameworks out there and lots of different standards. So today we've focused primarily on the NIST frameworks, but I'll touch on a couple of others later. We really focus on NIST just by way of example. So we're not, promoting, just the NIST frameworks, but they do provide good guidance, as Dave pointed out. And now I'll just briefly reiterate why you should even consider implementing an information security framework if your company has not done so yet. I work with companies of all different, and organizations of all different shapes and sizes, and some have not implemented a framework yet. So without reading the slide, of course, I'll just highlight some of the key reasons. It does provide a structured approach to managing your cybersecurity risks, and that can actually help you align your privacy program with your security initiatives. So it really brings those two teams together within the confines of a framework. Helps with risk management, again, from an integrated perspective. So now, again, we're not just talking about information security and privacy, but also maybe the teams that are responsible for developing artificial intelligence tools. Helps with compliance. So as a lawyer, of course, I care a lot about compliance with laws and regulations. These types of frameworks can help guide an organization toward compliance. Next slide. Another set of reasons is fosters better communication. So as I touched on earlier, there's kind of more of an integrated approach if you're using an information security or any framework for that matter, and you can sit around the table together. Different stakeholders from different functions can talk about the framework and find common ground. Most of these frameworks, I think all of them actually, and standards, I should say, also provide guidance on incident response. So that's something everybody needs to worry about. And the guidance is super helpful in that regard. And then enhances trust and customer confidence. It's another reason. Moving on.
Yeah, just quickly on that incident response, Heidi, I just wanted to quickly say, it's always a good idea to talk about incident response, something nobody wants to think about, but you're going to wish you had thought about it if it happens. So part of what the message that we're sending out to you all here is that by looking at these frameworks and working with these frameworks, you can you can't prevent incidents from happening, but you can certainly minimize the damage done by being proactive there. Exactly.
So now, again, honing in on another NIST framework, the cybersecurity framework, which was recently updated earlier this year. As Dave alluded to, you can see the purpose, the structure, and the key points are similar. These NIST frameworks look similar to each other in terms of how they're structured. The NIST cybersecurity framework, of course, is geared toward industry, government agencies, and other organizations, of course, but it's geared toward a taxonomy of high-level cybersecurity outcomes. So regardless of an organization's size or the sector or even the level of maturity, organizations can use a framework like this to prioritize and assess cybersecurity activities. It's flexible, like we've talked about. So again, not specific to a particular type of company or organization or industry or size. There are lots of resources that NIST provides, which are helpful, I think, for organizations to understand and use, as they implement their cybersecurity/data governance programs. And as Dave said earlier, when we refer to data governance, we're doing that intentionally because we understand that privacy and information security are just two pieces of a much bigger puzzle. Risk management, as we talked about earlier, is an important aspect of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And I mentioned, the applicability to all different types of organizations. We can move on. As I said earlier, we're not just promoting NIST. We do like NIST, but we're not just promoting NIST. So on the next couple of slides, I have a few examples of other information security standards and regulations that you might want to take a look at, depending on if they're applicable to you. Again, I won't go into too much detail here, but one well-known set of standards are the payment card industry DSS standards. That set of standards apply only to certain types of data, primarily payment card data. So, credit card, debit card data. And that standard, it's actually called a standard, even though you think it should be plural, but that set of controls, I should say, has been around for quite some time. Every few years, the payment card industry standards are updated. And the latest version, I believe, is version 4.0, which includes several updates, including multi-factor authentication requirements, increased flexibility for organizations to demonstrate the way they protect payment card data, and targeted risk analyses. Again, lots of detail about PCI DSS. Not sure if that's relevant to you, but just something to be aware of. Another example are the New York State Department of Financial Services cybersecurity regulations, which I believe were last amended last year. And as, again, we're seeing this common theme as with the other information security standards and frameworks. These requirements include risk assessment requirements, having a robust cybersecurity program, having policies and procedures, having an incident response plan, and annually certifying compliance. Next slide. Many of you have probably also heard about the ISO standards. So the two that we hear about a lot in our world is ISO 27001 and 27002. These are international information security standards. 27001 is actually the world's best known standard for the creation of an information security management system, or ISMS. And the way I think about 27001 is it's kind of like the really broad, framework. Whereas 27002 provides best practices and guidance for implementation of an ISMS, or an information security management system. So 27002 provides a practical blueprint so that organizations can safeguard not just certain data types, but all of their information assets. Next slide. Where are we now? Oh, sorry. There's also a privacy overlay to 27001, which you might be aware of, which specifies requirements, again, related to an information security management system, but it specifies requirements for establishing, implementing, and maintaining a privacy information management system. So as Dave talked about earlier, personal information is obviously one data type that many organizations do need to worry about and need to protect. And so the overlay is focused on that data type and the creation of a privacy information management system. Next slide. Now we're going to switch gears in the interest of time. Again, we could probably spend an hour talking about each and every one of these frameworks, but in the interest of time, we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about AI. That's a topic that's on everyone's minds these days. So much like the NIST privacy framework and the NIST cybersecurity framework, NIST also has released an artificial intelligence risk management framework. And as you can see on this slide, it looks very similar in terms of the organization of it and the structure and the purpose. It's related to managing risks, of course, associated with the use of AI learning and tools. And the framework, I'll get to sort of a little bit more detail on the next slide about a profile related to the framework, but the framework itself is intended to be a comprehensive guide, and it's intended to provide a structured approach to managing the AI risks that organizations are grappling with, and ensuring that AI systems are reliable, safe, transparent, explainable, privacy enhanced, and fair. So it's got lots of different goals. And it's also voluntary, much like the other frameworks we've talked about. So it's not a law, but it's by far a best practice, particularly if your organization is very new, and experimenting with AI. I think it's a good place to start. And Dave, I don't know if you wanted to add anything here before I move on.
Yeah, no, just that, again, I think that the thing to really pay attention to here is that if you're in the position of being responsible for privacy compliance and you're working closely with your IT security teams, leaning on the NIST AI risk management framework is going to provide a lot of benefits, because your IT security teams are already going to be familiar with a lot of the terms, structure. It's just going to get you off to a good running start. That would be what I would say.
Absolutely. So as we talked about earlier, that stakeholder communication and partnership and integration, it would work in this context as well, for sure. Next slide. So as I touched on, in addition to the framework itself, there's a specific, what's called a profile, which focuses on generative AI. That was released by NIST in July of this year. So everything's very new, of course, in this area. And it's intended to help organizations identify the unique risks associated with generative AI, as well as actions for managing those risks. So again, think of it as a kind of a more targeted approach for the use of generative AI. And we can move on. These next couple slides are going to look very similar to what we've already discussed, because many of the reasons why you would implement the NIST cybersecurity framework, or at least use it as a baseline for your discussions with various teams, are the same reasons that you would implement an AI framework. As of now, there are not a whole lot of laws. In the EU, there is one, but in the US, we're sort of in this wild, wild west right now with respect to the use of AI. So the main reason, in my opinion, is to have, again, a set of a framework, and it's sort of a starting point, I guess I should say, for experiments with AI. So as we talked about, provides guidelines for identifying risks, assessing those risks, documenting those risks, which is very important. And those of us that have been doing privacy stuff for years, we're very, very used to, that requirement of having to document, what data you're collecting, why are you collecting it, for what purposes, who are you sharing it with, et cetera. So this is a very comfortable place, I think, for us to be. Data governance, as we've talked about, is very, very important. And I think with the increased use of AI tools, more and more organizations are focusing on data governance. So super important. We've also talked about, actually, we haven't talked yet about bias mitigation. So when you're thinking about AI, one of the really important things to consider is the potential for bias or, sort of unintentional discrimination. And so the framework, or a framework like the NIST AI framework, is also helpful to identify and sort of be aware of the potential for bias, and then to try to mitigate it.
Yeah, Heidi, let me just jump in there quickly and kind of underscore a couple of things that you just said that I think are important takeaways here. One is that you opened up by saying that while there aren't a lot of laws currently on the books, all indications point toward there will be in the future.
Mhm.
So this is for people that want to get ahead of the curve and begin their data governance with regard to AI technologies within your organization. And I'd like to highlight the risk assessment. A couple of big takeaways I've seen again and again from the recent AI conferences that I've attended, I know Heidi, you've attended as well, are that doing first, understanding where AI is being used within your organization is important. As Heidi mentioned, documenting where they're being used is a great kind of initial, almost like a due diligence pre-step before these laws hit the books. And then I'll finish with this, the risk evaluation, which is so important in terms of where to focus your limited resources, compliance resources. And by that, I mean, there may be AI uses within your organization that are, for instance, low risk. You might be using some AI technologies to determine what's going to happen at some internal functions to best manage and make effective use of people's time internally. The chances of things going wrong there are relatively low risk. However, if you're using AI technologies at your organization to evaluate whether people are going to become eligible for mortgages or other important documents, that's obviously, and you're utilizing these technologies to aid your business in that. If you get that wrong, that involves a lot of risk. So doing an accurate kind of risk analysis to the best of your ability internally now on the outputs of AI technologies is really a good place to get started.
Absolutely. The last thing you want to do is sort of have to retroactively document decisions that were made or the way code was developed, things like that. Absolutely, 100% agree with that. So next slide, again, it's just a bit more detail along the same lines of what we've been talking about. We talked already about incident response preparedness. So AI in this case, actually, it's interesting because as we all know, AI, like much like any other new technology, can be used for, quote unquote, bad purposes, but also for good purposes. So AI actually can enhance your incident detection and response capabilities, which is a good thing. But nevertheless, you do want to make sure you understand, how that will work. I'm just kind of making this up, but I'm thinking, there could be situations where AI thinks that there's an incident or, flag something that may sort of cause everyone to panic or divert resources, and maybe it's not. So you can think of lots of situations where AI can either help with existing processes and procedures and so forth, but also can hinder. So all the more reason why, as Dave said, it's really important to try to get ahead of all of this, not wait for it to happen. Be really thoughtful about and methodical about everywhere that your company is using AI and all the different ways that AI might sort of interact with your existing processes, including incident response.
Mm-hmm.
It can also help with, again, this is a helpful thing, obviously, with compliance efforts. Maybe AI could eventually, I think it's a little early personally myself, but eventually maybe it can actually help you stay on top of your data handling practices. So again, it's like anything else. It's got sort of the pros and the cons, but the most important thing is having a structure and having a framework that you can then, develop an entire, program around, and the constant sort of need to talk to each other and learn, like, what are your software developers doing? What is incident response doing? What is every other organization or function, I should say, within your organization doing that might be implicated by either a set of standards, like a framework or guidance, or law. It doesn't have to be law yet for us to need to pay attention to it. All right, moving on. I think we've really driven this point home at this point. So next one, stakeholder communication. We keep talking about that. So yet another reason, and continuous learning and improvement would be 2 other reasons. All right, now we're going to switch gears and talk about operational, like the how, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. So for your data governance program, and again, now kind of we've been building up to this point where in the early days, it was IT security, privacy came onto the scene as a part of a data governance program, and now governance of new AI technologies that are increasingly being brought into organizations, both for internal purposes and for external purposes in terms of interacting with customers and such, are now being grouped under this umbrella of data governance. And so we wanted you to focus on, in terms of getting your compliance program either up and running from scratch or enhancing it, on these 3 kind of areas. So the first one, people, process, technology, and platform. It's of utmost importance that you focus on the people that are within the departments that are handling these decisions, these AI technology decisions, and the inputs and the collection and the processing of personal information, and really build relationships, build trusting relationships with those folks, so that they are on your side, that they are allies, that they're helping you get your compliance tasks done. The processes, that you have to start somewhere, start from scratch by doing assessments, identifying where you're utilizing these AI technologies, where you're collecting personal information, how you're processing it, where it's being stored. And then in terms of where it's being stored and how it's being processed, the technology platforms are ever changing. As I said earlier, not a static process, but a dynamic process. So doing data mapping exercises, system architectures, having them on hand and requiring that they be constantly monitored and updated when new technologies come on board, which they are constantly coming on board. These are the 3 things to really focus on in terms of making your compliance program effective. This holistic approach, I think we kind of decided to add this here in the middle because many of us that have been working in the privacy space and now the data governance space more broadly for years know that it's the opposite of a siloed approach. It needs to be a holistic approach. You need to have working relationships with various folks in different departments, in legal, in marketing, in sales, in IT, in operations. It just goes really across the board. And so it's important to be a generalist and to be able to think on your feet and see the big picture if you're going to be working in data governance compliance programs. Promoting the culture of security, it all goes back and starts with protecting information, protecting inputs, outputs, and the information that you're bringing into and working with within your organization. So that can't be, it's a constant vigilance type of attitude that needs to happen. As I mentioned earlier, IT security awareness training needs to happen at the levels throughout your organization where people are touching the data. And that just needs to be a constant process. And then moving on, for data governance programs, we also want to talk about being a proactive business partner and convener. Talked about that a moment ago in terms of reaching out. I was sharing with Heidi a quick story that I heard at a conference once that I've always remembered, which is one great way to build up solid relationships with your IT security department, in case you're in the privacy department now, is to reach out to them proactively and ask them what you can do to them. How can I help you? What initiatives do you have currently that I might be able to help with, or my team might be able to help with? If you reach out and do that and offer them a favor, when you need some things from them and need to have some work done by their department, it's going to be a lot easier to approach them to ask for their help on the initiatives that you have going. Third-party cyber risk is a whole nother important area. As you know, big organizations, even small and medium-sized organizations, frequently outsource tasks and work processes to subcontractors. And so having a good third-party risk management program in place is vital to your compliance efforts. Security by design.
And sorry to interrupt you, Dave. I'm just going to add one more thought about third-party cyber risk because
sure, absolutely.
It's kind of near and dear to my heart. Without naming names or anything, of course. it's amazing how many contracts I see, like downstream agreements with downstream service providers. And sometimes, I'm working with the service provider. Sometimes I'm working with the entity, or my client is the entity that's engaging the service provider. So I see it sort of on both sides, but it still amazes me that even in today's day and age, many of these agreements don't have any language about data protection, data security, and now of course AI as well. Like if one party wants to limit the other's use of their data for AI purposes, that needs to be addressed in the contract. So this is a huge, third-party cyber risk is a huge area of vulnerability for everybody. And I'm going to sound like a lawyer, but making sure your agreements are up to snuff is super important, no matter which side you're on.
That's right, Heidi. And would you say that it's fair to say that the trend in terms of regulations has been toward having liability sit higher upstream? So
Yes.
Whereas in early days, it may have been you might try to take a defense if you're using GDPR language to the controller, that you were using a processor and there was a breach or some kind of mishandling of data and that processor downstream, that they might that's on them. Increasingly, it's the responsibility is going upstream, and it's the responsibility of the controllers to work with contractors that are handling that data well, and to understand exactly how they are processing, what they're doing and what they're not, what they shouldn't be doing with the data, right?
150%. That's exactly right. That is the trend. It's and at the end of the day, whether it's a government enforcement agency, regulator, or even a class action plaintiff's attorney, it doesn't matter, right? At the end of the day, the simple way to think of it is, I wouldn't say it doesn't matter what your contract says, because it does. Obviously it does. But at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, everyone is going to look to every party in the chain, right? Everybody that handled the data, the fingers get pointed, and you can't, like you said, you can no longer sort of say, well, that that's not our problem. It's everyone's problem, unfortunately.
Right. Right. And then as an antidote to this security by design, just as privacy by design, or now increasingly AI governance by design, means after you feel like you've gotten a handle on these uses and put into place some policies and procedures to be able to appropriately manage and safely manage your data flows, building in safety mechanisms within your company, your organization, that require new uses, new collection points, new vendors coming online, that they go through an evaluation process and be checked to make sure that the privacy controls are in place, the AI governance controls are in place, the security controls are in place by mandate. So when you see this by design, that just means that you're putting in place things like most privacy professionals are familiar with the PIA, that privacy impact assessment. So if something new is going to be coming in, a new vendor, a new process, a new collection point, it needs to go through a questionnaire, a testing, to see if it's going to create risk. And if it is, are the appropriate controls put into place? So this is the kind of final evolution, the proactive, forward-looking protections that you're going to want to put into place in terms of governance and controls within your organization. We can move on. And so now we're going to talk about the how and leave you. We're just about to wrap up here, some key actionable steps. And as Heidi and I were working on putting this presentation together for you, we realized that there's a large difference depending on where you sit within the size of your organization. And there's some big differences between working with a large company that, for instance, may have a full-fledged internal legal team that's very up on all the latest requirements, as opposed to working for a smaller organization where you're really consumed by keeping the doors open and the lights on and just operating the business, and probably have less knowledge and less time and less resources to spend on your compliance obligations. So Heidi, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of the difference in size of organization with regards to your clients and what might be important there?
Sure. And this also gets back to what we talked about earlier with respect to the NIST frameworks and how they are again, I don't work for NIST, but just by way of example, how they are designed for organizations regardless of the quote unquote level of maturity. And when we say that, I mean, I certainly don't mean anything bad by that. Companies obviously and organizations come in all different shapes and sizes. So if you're a startup, that's great. I mean, we love startups, right? But that means necessarily that you may not have the resources that a larger organization has. So as we touch on this slide, for the larger organizations, it's a lot of what we've talked about, get to know your colleagues in information security, corporate security, IT, HR. We've only listed a few examples here, but pretty much any other function where, data, and I'm going to say this broadly, not just personal information, but any data that has value to your organization. Maybe it's sensitive and confidential proprietary data. Maybe it's not even personal information, but get to know your colleagues and have a routine cadence with meeting with them, and don't just focus on. We see a lot of companies and organizations only focus on data governance after something bad happens, after there's an incident. That while that is a wake-up call, it's not the time to be proactive. Think of it like an insurance policy. Like everything you do in advance, like Dave said earlier, will protect you hopefully down the road. We talked about third-party cyber risk. Dave touched on some of this. Have good processes in place. And by the way, some of this applies to regardless of the size of your organization. But what we've highlighted on this slide is that we recognize that if you're smaller, you may not have these processes in place yet. So you want to kind of work toward developing these due diligence processes, questionnaires, all the things we've been talking about with respect to third-party vendors. Yeah, go ahead.
Heidi, can I jump in there and say for smaller organizations, the sub-bullet under the first bullet, initial focus should be on front-end due diligence, contract language review, and audit assistance. One of the places that you need to start if you're a smaller organization is to be aware of what you're broadcasting out to the public on your websites and in all of the notices and the assurances that you're making, especially if you're a heavy B2C company. Make sure that the assurances that you're broadcasting and making public are stating the correct things that you need to state to be in compliance. And then importantly, as a very important second prong step, make sure that you're doing those things internally, that you're honoring the promises that you're making in terms of your outward facing, again, privacy notices, AI governance notices, IT security notices. So start with what is being seen publicly, and then make sure that you're backing up those promises as a kind of a structure to work from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's really, really good advice. I think we can move on. I think this is our last slide. And this is, stating the obvious a little bit, but, be an engaged advocate. So as Dave mentioned earlier, let's just, again, by way of example, let's just say you sit in the privacy office, or you're wearing a hat that includes the responsibility for privacy in your organization. Proactively go to your colleagues that work in IT, that are responsible for software development, that work in information security, and are responsible for InfoSec, and ask them how you can help them. That is a really good way to start the conversation. And if you want to be invited to the table when they have meetings and conversations, it's a great way to show them that you see them as a partner, and they will see you as a partner. Support their mandates. Again, some of this is stating the obvious, but it really works. I've spent a lot of my career in big companies and organizations. I was the chief privacy officer for a $13 billion company, and I cannot emphasize this enough. The partnership is so important. It goes a really long way. And of course, being a lawyer, if you look at the fourth bullet, I'm also going to say make sure you're having someone in legal or an outside counsel or an outsourced CPO like me or whatever review your documentation and your contracts, and get that extra level of review if you can, because everyone's super busy, and things do get missed. So it's no one's fault. It's just the way it is. We live in a fast-paced world, so it's really important to get it right. And I'm not saying you wouldn't, but having that other layer of review is really helpful. And then stay on top of what's happening, which is very hard. Again, we live in a fast-paced world. Things are always changing. But if you're not sure, ask. If you see something about a potential new law getting passed in, Montana, I don't know, I'm just making this up, reach out and ask, because we're probably tracking it and we can keep you up to date. Both Dave's organization and my organization are doing that.
That's a perfect place to kind of wrap things up, Heidi. And that is, I couldn't agree more that having those trusted partners, getting that buy-in from the top, getting that support. We understand that I don't think I've ever met a privacy compliance professional who has said, I'm fully resourced and everything is great, and we have everything that we need. Everybody is trying to do too much. Everybody is under-resourced, but know that help is available. Help is available within your own organizations, and help is available for legal advice. As Heidi mentioned, you're seeing Heidi's bio up here right now, and my own. And if we could go to the next slide, actually, if you want a copy of these slides, if you're interested in going back and reviewing anything Heidi and I have covered, we'll be more than happy to provide you with a PDF of these slides. Help is out there. External counsel who has expert advice, who's keeping up with all the regulations, such as Heidi, are available. And folks like myself and the other amazing team that we have over at Mina Partners are available and can help with the operational aspects of actually making the program work within your organization, of helping you to comply with the regulations that you're subject to in your different jurisdictions. So one last time, our contact information is up there on the screen right now. You can get a PDF of these slides by reaching out to us. Just feel free to send an email to Heidi or myself. And lastly, a big shout out to team members, Shanae on our team here, who's helped us with getting the program up and running the slides for us today, and the rest of the team that helped with putting this presentation together. So with that, I will take us to a program close. Thank you all for joining us today, or if you're listening to this recording, spending a little time with us. Hope we've provided some insight and some value to you, and have a great rest of your day or evening. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you.